Good morning, fellow yogis. A little cooler here in Vancouver today, and I'm dressed in my choir attire as I need to head off for our concert after. So, treat is a little shorter class, not because of choir, but just because it is. So let's start with our 3 prostrations. Giving thanks for the teachings, body, speech, and mind. And hopefully I have purified some bad karma already. Just got yelled at for leaving the freezer open, even though I was trying to prepare lunch for the homestay students, so she doesn't need to. But if you hear me get yelled at, that's what it is. Here's our regular student. Today, sitting, I don't know, maybe back of the class. She's had her shots. So I think we'll be running back and forth, right? Mm-hmm. And let's start with our opening prayers. And to remember that the first one is remembering of one of the 3 principal paths, bodhicitta, reaching enlightenment for the sake of other beings. So let's do this one in English today. All right. Here's the great earth, filled with the smell of incense, covered with a bed of flowers. In my mind, I make it a paradise of the great mountain, the 4 continents, wearing a jewel of the sun and the moon. In my mind, I make him paradise of a Buddha and offer it all to you. By this deed, may every living being experience the pure world. Idam Guru Ratnam Madakam Niratayami. Now taking refuge. Where again we are seeking protection from a suffering life. So why don't we do the first one in English, first one in Tibetan, second one in English, and the third time in Tibetan. Okay? Sangye Chudang Soki Choknam La Changshu Pardu Dakni Yapsu Chi Dakni Jinyin Gipe Sunam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Jupar Shok. I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I reach the heart of enlightenment. By the goodness of giving and the rest, may I reach enlightenment for the sake of every living being. Sangye Chudang Soki Choknam La Jangshu Pardu Dakni Yapsu Chi Dakni Jinyin Gipe Sunam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Jupar Shok. Yeah, I like to kind of just remember why we do those 3 prostrations and opening prayers, because I remember we would kind of just repeat it all, before every class, and after a while it just became kind of like something you do to get to the good stuff. Oh, okay. Well, student is saying she doesn't want to listen to the class. She's gonna say she had to use the washroom. So, okay, you can listen to the video later. Anyway, so yeah, I think it's good to remember the reason why if we're repeating something over and over. Good example, you brush your teeth. Don't do it mindfully. You can get cavities. I think I got one in a spot I didn't brush really very well, as the dentist told me. That kind of sucks because, yeah, didn't think I'd get cavities when I'm 52. But anyway, what to review from last class? To review from last class, there was a lot about how the Buddha has the 5 qualities of knowing all things, being a protector, having gone to bliss, being the teacher, and last one, having the desire to help all beings. And what does that all come from? Again, that was maybe a review of 2 classes ago, that Buddha has been the only one to describe that life is suffering very clearly and in a way that we can all experience. And if there are some young yogis listening to this, maybe they haven't, thought about getting old and getting sick, but I'm sure they have seen others know that this happens to us and knows that we're going to die. So that is definitely kind of the main message, that Buddha, that we can affirm that first noble truth, that life is suffering. And because of that, we know he's correct, and we can consider everything that he says to be an authoritative source. So what are we covering today? This is kind of like the big class, this is the theme. The title of this course is the proof of past and future lives. And, it's a nice title, but it seems to have taken us 6 classes to build up to this. So this is what it is. And as I actually mentioned in the first class, we kind of went over it in that last course. But maybe there are some new things or things you forgot. The first one is, you remember the grandfather of logic, Master Dignaga, and those were his 2 lines that we went over last week. The father of logic is Master Dharmakirti, and then the commentary that we're studying today, we could say the son of logic, is Kedrup J. Kedrup J, one of the 2 main disciples of Jason Kappa, who you'll hear almost in every course, because he's wrote 10,000 lines of scripture, but supposedly given to him through a vision, through talking to Maitreya. So what he's commentating, the topic is the material cause of the mind. So take a look at a plant. Hopefully there is one near you, or you can look out the window and see a tree. if you really can't see one, you have no window around here, just close your eyes, imagine a big beautiful tree that you like, can visualize. And whatever the size, I hope you realize it came from a seed, a tiny little seed. Even these big, great pine trees, might come from a pine cone, but it's kind of like a little seed inside the core of that pine cone that has led to this beautiful big tree. So this is kind of the Buddhist definition of material cause. And it's saying the stuff that turns into the final product. The seed is the material cause for a tree. An acorn is the material cause for an oak, big oak tree. And so there are what they call secondary factors, like, sunlight is needed for it to grow, water, fertilizer, if you're maybe not for a tree, but for many plants, that's what they need. But those are secondary factors. Those are not the things that, are the material cause of a tree, right? So it's important to, I guess, just remember this, because, we all hopefully will agree that a tomato seed is not going to turn into an orange tree. That if you did plant an acorn, you're not going to expect a fruit tree or, some other fruit, right? So if that is what we do believe, what we see exist, this is, the foundation of what we need to understand what is the cause of our mind. What is the cause of our mind? And, in the class that I heard, I'm going to change up the order of it. Maybe just to clarify what Buddhists mean by mind, they describe it as clear and aware. Clear and aware. It's the mind. For many of us, we might think it's the brain, but, it is I'd say it is our thoughts, that I hope you agree that you can't see it, you can't squish it, they say, you can't we do believe it is kind of like our brain operating, but if, after you had a stroke or a car accident, we may believe the person's mind is affected when we don't really know that, there are examples where people become paraplegics or quadriplegics. They can't move their limbs, but their mind is still very functional, right? And then again, there are people who've had brain injury, and then we can't seem to get a response out of them, right? So there's this maybe a short little meditation, maybe I'll kind of guide you into, to have you just close your eyes, sit up nice and tall. To have you experience the mind a little. To have you go back to one of your, an early favorite memory, childhood memory. See if you can really transport yourself there. And as if you're wearing a virtual reality helmet, notice what you see, not just in front of you, to the side, up and down in this memory. What you hear. Maybe it's something you can touch or taste. Is there a smell associated with this memory? Can you really feel in your body what you felt at that time? I have a hard time imagining yourself now having to call on that memory, that feeling. You're about to act in a short scene. You need to access a feeling, wonderfully happy childhood memory. I'm sure you might want to stay there or head off to another one, but we'll just wrap it in a ball of gold light and let it float away like a balloon. And to pick another wonderful, happy memory, sometime between the first one and today. It doesn't have to be like the greatest memory, and that seems to be what caused me a bit of trouble, just something that you enjoyed. That touched you. And again, just step into that scene again with all your senses. Again, eyes are dominant sense. What you hear. You're tasting or touching anything. Smell anything. And again, to feel. That feeling is probably what made you recall this memory. Just enjoy that feeling you had from this experience moment. Wrap that up in a ball of gold light and let it float away. And now come into the present moment. Feel your body, position you're sitting in or lying down. Your eyes are probably hopefully closed. So what do you hear? What do you smell? Your fingers feel anything? Is your tongue tasting anything? Just note how you're feeling also. 10 being the most intense, 1 being the least. How strongly do you feel what you're feeling? And now take your mind off into the future. To something you're going to have to do after class today. Nothing you're not sure. Something you're going to have to do tomorrow or the day after. Some activity that you know you have to do so that you can, again, see it with your 5 senses. What you see when you're doing this. What you hear. I forgot to say if you were saying anything. Tasting anything. What do you smell? And though you won't know, as much as you'd like to think you know how you will feel, just guess what you might feel when you're doing this. And feel it now. Wrapping that up in a ball of gold light. Could you honestly say there is a big difference between any of these 4 visualizations I asked you to recall, think of, imagine? Sure, there's some which you might have felt more, or seen more, been more clear. You could sense more with some of your senses. But if I could experience these 4 bubbles, balloons, moments, 2 in the past, your present, your future. Couldn't you, and I didn't know which one was which, for example, could you agree that perhaps wouldn't know the difference between, a past event and a future or present event. That there's nothing exactly to distinguish it. In fact, maybe some of your past ones, because they were happy ones, might even seem more real to me. So maybe one more quick visualization to see the power of our mind. How it can go back in the past, into the future. See if you can find the boundary of your mind. How far out into space can your mind go? Humans have only found the edges of some of our universe. But can you now not imagine places further than what humans have discovered? And now if I ask you to bring your mind to the tiniest, smallest thing humans have discovered, what makes up an atom even? Quarks, they say. Even though humans might not have seen what makes up a quark, maybe could you visualize and imagine something smaller than a quark that makes up a quark? So again, another example of the power of your mind. You can go further than any human ever has to the smallest thing a human has ever seen, and even smaller, with a blink in a second. I could probably have you imagine earlier than humans existed. Maybe a time in the future when humans don't exist. Can you imagine maybe like an infinitely long spaghetti that your mind can extend into the past, into the future, never ending, like a super long spaghetti? If not, imagine the spaghetti forming the largest circle you have ever can imagine. Is there a beginning or end to this circle? just to let this visualization go, wrap it with a ball of gold light, let it float away. Come out of this meditation and just move your body ever you need to. Shake out your legs, move your spine if you're sitting. I'm kind of giving you some other qualities of our mind. Can go anywhere, universe or end of the universe, the smallest part of the universe. Nothing that can contain its boundaries. You know, really is there a boundary to your mind? You can move it any direction. So yeah, we're coming back to again what Kidrup J is trying to prove. Where is that first moment of mind? And so his proof is, if you look on the picture in the email, is trying to eliminate what it is not. Trying to eliminate what it is not. So if you consider, you know, what is everything in this universe, you know, they call it in Tibetan Sheja, all knowable things, all knowable things. And if this includes everything that you can imagine, they say you can divide that into two: unchanging things, you know, things, and changing things. So we'll go more into changing things, break that down more. But unchanging things supposedly there are not so many of them, you know. That Buddhists like to use this term instead of permanent things because, you know, one of the examples is the emptiness of an object. So use that example about spaghetti, about a mind being like a spaghetti. And here I'm showing you the side where you can't see the end of the spaghetti. You don't know how long where the ends are. But yeah, so the emptiness of the spaghetti is that it doesn't exist self-existently. This thread of spaghetti. Supposedly it comes from our mind projecting onto it, right? An animal, a baby, Aboriginal won't see this as a spaghetti thread. You might not too. I'll bring it closer, you know? So, they say, what is unchanging? There's not many things that are unchanging in this world. Space, and the emptiness of objects. But what they're saying is that, you know, as we know, spaghetti may not last forever, especially if it gets wet. It can probably slowly, you can imagine over time, if it gets wet, gets moisture, it's going to get soggy, decompose, right? It will one day disappear. So they will say that the emptiness of this spaghetti, of an object, disappears when that object disappears. So in a way, it isn't permanent, but it's unchanging. It doesn't change as long as that object is there. So that's why they don't use that term permanent, because it can disappear. Changing things are almost all things that we see in this world, things that come from a cause, that change as soon as they were created, right? Tree, spaghetti, you, me, this device, your screen that you're watching. Right? Yeah. So now there's a lot of changing things. So what can we divide that into? And the two categories you can divide it into is mind, and they say physical matter. Mind we'll look at later because we're trying to prove where the mind comes from. But physical matter is like, all things which they subdivide into all outside matter, things made up of atoms, right? At this time in Buddhism, they didn't have the term for atoms, so they talked about 4 elements, fire, earth, water, air, supposedly energies that have created all physical things, all outside matter is what they use to, and they use that as a representation of its properties. So that's how they kind of described it back in the day. But yeah, we can see it as now with the electron microscope as being made up of atoms, things are, and even smaller than that, quarks, right? But they also include our sense powers, and what are those? They can divide that into, well, sense powers are 5 senses I kind of led you through, our sight, our ears, our smell, taste, touch. So they're saying, if we divide all physical matter into these two, let's look at the sense powers. Is our mind coming from our senses? Now, the 2 choices it could be is that if it comes from all 5 senses, that, if you argue our mind comes from all our senses, then that would mean if we lost ability to use one sense, you've heard of people who've been blinded, right, or deaf, or can't smell, I once knew a fellow university student that when she was small, she stuffed things up her nose, this little, I forgot what it was, but she stuffed it and it damaged her nerves in her nose, and then she couldn't smell for the rest of her life. But if the mind comes from all 5 of these senses, if one of the senses was damaged, then supposedly the mind would be damaged. And as you can do with your eyes closed, probably that's the easiest one. Imagine you can't see anything. You can agree that your mind's not affected. You can still move your mind at the edges of the universe and beyond, the smallest parts, left, right, with your eyes closed. And if you try that with your ears closed or your nose closed or not tasting anything, you can agree your mind isn't affected. So that's Kedrup saying it can't be because of your 5 senses. Now, how about if it is just one sense? If it's just one of the 5 senses? And I guess using the example of sight, because that's our dominant sense, if it is true it was made of one of the 5 senses, and just say it's a sight, if our sight was damaged, then our mind should be affected too. Or sorry. No, the argument is that the argument is that the mind should capture as clearly as that sense captures. If it was really, if the mind comes from our eyes, for example, we should be able to see as clearly without our eyes. And we might have to agree, you can try that. Look at something right now in front of you. It could be me on the device, then close your eyes. And though you may be able to recall many parts of what you just looked at, you have to agree that you don't see it as clearly. But if your mind came from your eyes, it should be able to, your mind should be able to see as clearly as your eyes. If it came from your ears, you should be able to hear as clearly something, even if your ears didn't work, which is not true. Your smell, if you couldn't smell, your mind can't imagine smells as well as your nose. You agree that for taste and touch, right? So it can't come from that because our mind doesn't have the same, it isn't as able to sense any of those five senses as well, right? So that is the argument for them not being one sense. So, okay, going back to physical matter, if it's not sense powers, then could it be made of outside matter, you know? And then this is the same argument of all or many, that if your mind was made out of, just say, some elements, pick any, hydrogen, I don't know if you recall all the elements of the periodic table. I think there's 130 of them, but supposedly that combination makes up everything that we see, right, in the outside world. But if it was made up of all of these elements, right, that the mind requires all 130 elements in some proportion to make up our mind. If one element was missing, then our mind should not work. Right? And again, we can say that is not true. Our mind works even if an element is missing. And then that if it is made of just one element, just say it's one of those ones we don't really know of, there are some gases in the periodic table that are rare or not very common. And you say, well, it's made up of that, something we don't really know and studied much about. Well, if that is true, then wherever that element is, there would be a mind. And from what we know, we have only observed that the mind exists in humans. So that is how it disproves that it is all of the elements, all of the atoms, or just one of them. So coming back to the bigger category of changing, whether it's physical matter or now mind, this is where our mind, if we say that's the one thing that we haven't looked at, comes from either our own mind or other people's mind. The argument they're saying is that, well, a lot of people do, I guess science does say our body started from the meeting of our father's sperm with our mother's egg. And once they met, then they multiplied and became us. So maybe that is how our mind is caused, from one or a combination of our parents' minds. Now, if that was true, then, they're saying, the gift your father has or your mother has would transfer to the kid, or the problems, weaknesses that they have would be passed on. And you could say it is true, there's quality traits which are passed down, but they're not all passed down, right? So, yeah, genetically, not everything is passed down. So we can't, this is the argument for saying it cannot come from others, it doesn't make sense to come from, a stranger, or someone you talk to. Your mind did not come from them. But the one that more people might agree to think about is your parents' mind. And they're saying, yeah, because you don't have exactly the same, mind as one of your parents, then it isn't from someone else's mind. So what does that leave in this whole classification of everything that exists? Well, your mind then comes from your own mind. Yeah. So that it must have come from a previous moment of your mind. You come back to this spaghetti example, and this is representing time, that at this point here, where you're at, where did your mind come from? From a previous moment, a little bit before. From the moment of mind yesterday, moment of mind last week, moment of mind last year, and back and back and back and back and back, even till your moment of conception. Just say it's over here, moment of conception, the very start you think of your existence. Well, where did that moment of mind come from? The moment of mind before that. So this is the argument for past and future lives, that our minds are eternal, beginningless, endless, and this is because our mind has to come from the same material cause, that it comes from a previous moment of mind. And so that before we're conceived, after we die, our mind continues, and what is difficult, I think it was difficult for me to, I still say, that I can definitely understand if you kind of go, ooh, eternal, beginningless, are not concepts that we can have easily think of. We don't, when someone says, oh, humans existed 15,000 years ago, it's like, it's a long time, but how many things were eternal? Supposedly our planet was not eternal. It was created from the Big Bang, other planets exploding, and we're a piece of that. But yep, that is Kedruk J's proof that our mind is beginningless and endless. So I was going to share something else, but I think I'm going to maybe do that either next class or do an extra little piece, because I do not want to be late. And so, yeah, this is the, hopefully what you remember we kind of covered, that the mind has to come from something similar, and if you eliminate everything that it can't be, all that our mind can be is coming from our mind. And it is unfortunate that we cannot recall our past lives, our mind in our past lives, though there are people who can, who have that skill and have that gift. And so they can even see, I've been to somebody who could see my past life. Yeah, that is the class for today. And so let us close with closing prayer, a dedication of our karma that we receive from this class, maybe dedicate it to our enlightenment, right? So let's do it once in English, once in Tibetan. By the goodness of what I've done in giving and the rest, may all beings complete the collection of merit and wisdom, and thus gain the two ultimate bodies that merit and wisdom make. Gewa di kewo kun, sunam yeshe zok zok sheng, sunam yeshe lejong wei, dampa kunyi topan shok. Okay, and again to give thanks for the teachings that we have been blessed to receive through the lineage, 2,500 years, offering our body, speech, and mind. And hoping for the body, speech, and mind of the Buddha. Thank you again for listening to class, and we'll see you next week.